Hey y'all, it's Steve-O. I hope everything is going well with you and that you're taking care of yourselves and the ones that you love. It's Saturday and I figured I would come out here and do a vlog. Before I do any of that, I'm going to do this, and I want to try to start doing this more often and start with a Bible passage. So I'm going to just put it up so you can pause it if you want to read it, and then I'm going to go ahead and read it myself. I hope that is up there good enough and you can pause it. This is from Psalms chapter 25 verses 6 through 7. Remember, Lord, your great mercy, for they are of old. Do not remember the sins of my youth and my rebellious ways. And what that is about, again, asking God to accept me right now for who I am, not that person who was old, who was young, I should say, of old, and rebellious and ungodly. I want to talk about something for new Christians, but I have to preface a few things. I'm in the process of rebuilding my entire life from the foundations, from the subfloor, from the beneath where the basement will be, up. If you're not familiar with contrition or familiar with what contrition is, first, in my own words, it is when emotionally you come to the realization of something and the emotions overwhelm you, and you will have essentially, you can cry. In fact, I was watching a video, I'll try to post it up here somewhere, link it, where, excuse me, I hope that was not a bug, where a gentleman was talking about when his first venture into Christianity happened, he kept having these bouts where when he would try to talk about it or describe it, he would just cry unabashedly. That's a form of contrition, meaning he couldn't even get to the words. What he was thinking and the reality of what hit him overwhelmed him. You may see that to some degrees here. With that, this is for what I would call new Christians, and this video first and foremost may not be for you, but I hope it can help you maybe when you deal with someone else. And this video, again, I laugh because it's right along path with what the Bible is teaching, in that this is for people who are sinners, but more specifically were sinners and are now trying to navigate that. Jesus didn't come to heal those who were already holy and not in need of repentance. He came to give the ability of repentance to sinners and the people in need of repentance. And that's kind of where I'm getting at. So if you're a new Christian and struggling with guilt, I'm going to take a sip of water and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Before I do, I want to talk about an analogy I used to use, and this will kind of come into play maybe a little bit later, but the term I used to use was the umbrella of Christianity, meaning if you're the person holding the umbrella, other people can benefit from it, even non-Christians. I'm going to do another video about the concept of, in my opinion, most Christians don't realize they're swimming in Christianity, and that's an analogy to the whole dilemma, does a fish realize it's wet? But I was fortunate enough to be raised kicking it. Again, I hated Christianity, and I'll get into that in a moment, but I was under the umbrella of it. And there's two biblical analogies I like to use now that I'm actually reading the Bible, where Jesus talks about a tree, and Jesus talks about, there's a parable of the woman at the table and him calling her the dog and all that, but I don't care about that so much as she talks about the crumbs from the table. And what I'm getting at is Christianity is so good that sometimes you can just accidentally, incidentally, or against your will have these Christian values in you. I was blessed to have some of that, and not enough, but I want to get into this, and I want to talk about guilt and moving forward as a new Christian Again, I'm only 2 months in, and this is where I'm just going to say this. I don't deserve forgiveness. It's something I have a lot of trouble navigating in my head. This is starting to be the first stages of contrition. I hope a lot of you watching this don't understand this, meaning that you have not lived this kind of life. But I struggle with people and Jesus in general, in particular, I should say. I don't, in my worldly human flesh views, I can sit here and say, Jesus, I don't deserve your forgiveness. And I want, I laugh because this is kind of my confessional booth out here. And so I can say this, but it's still hard to, saying these things out loud is very important. It's externalizing. But again, I lived what would be a vapid, godless, sinful, hedonistic life. But in addition, I don't know how to say this again. So I broke oaths to God. On behalf of myself, my marriage vows and things like that. But what makes me worse is the things I did to other people. And I want to talk about forgiveness too, guilt and forgiveness. Again, because I don't think I deserve forgiveness. And Jesus is saying, I don't care, Steve. That blows me away because I cursed him, shunned him, walked away, cussed at him. I broke other people's marriage vows because I was such an awful person. I would try to come into conflict with that as a way to flaunt how great I was. And so now I want to draw where I struggle is this. And I understand this, and this is where I'm navigating it. But people say, people you have wronged in the past, try to seek forgiveness, and I do, and I have, but there's a lot of rejection there, which I understand, and this is what I'm trying to get at. This is the importance of Jesus forgiving people like me, and maybe people like you. If I called my ex if I call the people I mentioned who I came in between their marriage and God, and people I've wronged, people I've manipulated, and I looked at them and said, hey, can you forgive me? It's very hard initially because if I take a first step back, that person may be in a point where they move beyond anything I've done to them. I'm not even on their radar. So what bothers me is, and I have to initially risk coming into their life and disturbing it, because maybe their husband sees that message or something of that nature, and it becomes a thing where maybe they discussed it in the past and their past, and maybe they didn't, and it comes up. I don't know how they dealt with the fact that I did that to them. But for me to come and just say, hi, I want to talk about all that, again, that creates issues for people, understandably. So now, let's say for some reason they have the humility to say, what do you want, Steve? Because maybe they think I'm, on my outs or whatever, need something life and death. And I just say to them, hey, I want to ask you to forgive me for what I did. There's a level of audacity there, meaning I did awful things to them. And then again, it's to a non-Christian, again, and I'm thinking back to me in my days, not putting this off on imagination how I would have been. If someone would have wronged me and then came back to me before this 2 months of Christianity and then said, Steve, I know what I did to you and your wife. I'm so sorry about that. But I accepted Christ and I want your forgiveness. I would love that. Or, however they word it. I would have ridiculed them. Like, are you? Do you know what you did to me? Again, just and because you did something for some God, you think I'm gonna forgive you? And that's where I say the importance of God is that God. Again, I'm gonna try to put some verses up here, but I say that I cannot. This is where I say people. I have trouble. I did a video about trusting in Jesus. I can't because I can't understand, and this is one of the things I love about getting to know Jesus is now, as I give my daughters someone to try to emulate, meaning not someone who says do this, do this, do that, while I'm not doing this and this and that, or I'm doing the opposite. Jesus has done everything that he expects me to do, and that degree of forgiveness is not something I can't trust in that. Which goes back to my old video about God understanding my heart and seeing what's there, is that, him seeing that, like, I'm trusting how I do. And again, I want to be able to trust like Jesus and like normal people, but I'm not there yet. One of the important things I'm starting to realize about the Bible is they make you think, and generally think forward. I talk a lot about how the Bible makes you see things differently, and I don't mean see things like the sky is brighter, the trees are, and the sun is this, and the things are so much brighter. I struggle with my Marine Corps past because, and I believe it's Paul. I haven't read this far yet, but I've heard in my readings, and back when I was against Christianity, Paul's things about him saying some things akin to, I don't deserve God's forgiveness. I was a Christian killer. My point being, and God makes you think forward, meaning when I think about, I'm very fortunate where I don't believe I killed anyone in my time in the Marine Corps. But it makes me question the fact that, again, I would have killed people. That's the whole thing about coveting something, is if I want the thing you have and you're not going to give it to me, the logical conclusion when you think it out is, I want it, I'm going to offer you, you're going to say no, I'm going to try and maybe beg for it, you're going to say no, all these things to try and get it, well, then I got to take it from you. That's, again, about lusting after someone. Well, when I think about them, if I'm lusting after them, that's all I'm thinking about. The logical conclusion is that I'm going to force sex upon them if they won't give it to me. Again, it's thinking things out. And like I say, I even question my Marine Corps thing because I see now where that would have led, even though it's the Marine Corps specifically changed me. I don't want to get into a lot of that. That's not what I was going to talk about, but I'm very happy. Again, in words I can't describe, it's that, in my soul, in ways that Jesus is there, and first, he's willing to, like I mentioned, he tells me, I'm forgiving you for that, but because I seek truth and try to emulate that, again, now I'm starting to look for ways to do that. I may never be able to forgive the way Jesus does and will do, but if I can move closer towards that, obviously I'm a better person. Part of the last thing I'll talk about is my father. And this is what I want to talk about, seeking forgiveness and why it's important. And understanding what forgiveness is, because forgiveness is never something that you should expect. It's something you should just value when it happens and work for. What I mean is, I was wronged by my father, but for the majority of my life, I felt my father owed me forgiveness for what he did. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but I never forgave my father. I talk so much about how I don't want to be a hypocrite, not for myself and especially for my daughters. Now I'm sitting there one day thinking about this, and I came to the realization where if I'm not going to be willing to, again, this may sound very simple to some normal people who have not lived these sinful lives, these egotistical, self-focused life. I'm like, how can I expect him to forgive me if I'm not forgiving him? And then it was like, again, in my ego and hubris, I don't need to forgive him. He did this to me, and that overshadowed anything I did to him, in my incorrect opinion, where if someone wrongs you more, I talked again about this in my last video, but we justify our wrong actions by making someone else wronger, so we're just not as wrong, so we're good. In fact, I was debating talking about this, and I want to, because I want to get this out, and I may touch on this more in another video, but I want this out there in the ether so I can reflect on it. Trauma, one aspect of trauma is loss. That's one facet of it, I should say. So, that's not the only thing of it. But when you are having traumatic loss, if it's a friend who leaves you, a pet, your mom, your dad, a significant other, wife, husband, when someone leaves you, they leave a hole in you. It's a child-sized hole, a daughter-sized hole, a husband-sized hole, mom-sized hole, and you're going to fill that with something, or have a void, a hole. You're going to be lacking. Now, what you fill that hole with may be something good, or it may be alcohol and drugs and hedonism. The more important that person is, the more traumatic it is when they leave that hole, and the harder it is to fill, the more important it is to fill it with something good, moral, of value, something that is going to be positive in the future, not fester as sinful. At some point, people like me, and I'm trying to navigate this, at some point in my life, either I walked away from God, or that aspect was never there, and I was left with a God-sized hole. And again, not having the guidance that I needed, again, I filled that hole with everything I wanted. At the expense of other people, at the expense of myself, at the expense of my future, at the expense of my past, at the expense of my family, at the expense of anything. If I wanted it, I would get it, and I filled that God-sized hole, which is the most important, the largest hole you'll ever have in your life. And again, some of you may not have that hole, because you may have that filled with something good and godly already, and God be praised if you do. But there are people like me who, again, now I've had that structural hole, and again, I filled it with anything, with alcohol, with drugs, with money, with chasing women, with any ego, with, again, hubris is a big thing. Vapid, empty things that now I don't know if, when I look back, I'm navigating having to dig all that out, or navigating looking at that hole and realizing it was empty the whole time that I was trying to fill it. Of all those holes, God is the only person who can fill a God-sized hole. And other than that, you're just going to either build that false idol, which I want to do another video about, because I think that is what most fringe Christians do, is worship false idols. They look at themselves in the mirror and say, God will forgive me because I'm so good, because I this, and no. I've rambled on long enough. I hope this was an insightful video. If it wasn't, it was very good for me regardless, so I'm okay with that. Again, this is kind of my confessional booth. I talk about externalizing, getting things out there, the fact that I don't really have anyone to talk to, so this is what I do. I hope everything is going well with you. You're taking care of yourselves and the ones you love, and until the next video, go easy and go with God.